Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar on strategic inventory planning for the holiday shopping rush. My name is Jeff Coleman and I'm the VP of Marketplaces here at CPC. We have a very exciting webinar for you today with our partners Webgility and SKUVault, and I'm excited to present everything to you today. We've got a couple of excellent speakers here. Rob McGroarty is the head of product at Webgility, and Danny Shaw is the director of business development at SKUVault. Both of them bring a wealth of knowledge around how to effectively plan for the holiday shopping season and plan inventory year-round in general. And they've prepared a lot of great information for our audience today. Very excited to get into it. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the meat and potatoes of the webinar. I want to make sure that all of our speakers today are set on mute and that everyone in the audience is as well. We've got a number of people joining in today, and so I want to make sure that everyone is audible to everyone else. If you do have questions that crop up throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them via the question box in the right. If you've never used GoToWebinar before, there should be a pane that pops up on the right-hand side of your screen with a question box where you can submit those, and those will go to all the panelists here today. We'll do our best to get to all of the questions that you guys submit, but if we don't get a chance to answer any of your questions, we'll also be following up after the webinar with a blog post recapping not just the presentation, but also the questions that the audience members have submitted, along with responses to those questions. So again, please do submit any questions you have. Like I said, we'll do our best to get to all of those today, but if we don't, please be on the lookout for that follow-up blog post that we'll be putting out there so that you can get the answers to your questions. Also included in that follow-up, we're going to be emailing out a recording of the webinar, so if there's something that you miss or you happen to show up a little late or you have to leave early, don't worry, we will be emailing out the full recording along with the deck of the presentation today so that everyone that registered will have that in their inbox waiting for them to review. There's also going to be some slides and other PDFs that we're going to be sharing with you all today. That will be available to you in the handouts panel. That's also available in that GoToWebinar panel on the right. So be on the lookout there for some additional resources. Our agenda today, here's some of the topics that Rob and Danny are going to be reviewing with you all today. We already went through some quick introductions. We're going to go over how to understand where you're at today, what some of your needs are. We're going to be reviewing strategic inventory management planning for the holidays. How does your inventory planning need to change as we get into the holiday season compared to what you're doing now or what you're doing today? FBA fees, there's going to be some changes to those. Hopefully you've been following some of the updates that Amazon has put out there, but just in case you haven't, or if there's any questions around those, we'll review exactly what's happening with the FBA fees, how those might affect you, and obviously if there's any questions, please feel free to write in there. We're going to go over how to do a deep dive into some of that historical data, and finally, some financial intelligence for Amazon sellers. And we'll wrap things up with a Q&A session where we'll try and get to as many of the questions as possible, but again, if we don't, please feel free to continue submitting those questions anyways, and we'll follow up with a blog post after addressing all of them. Real quick before I hand over the controls, I did want to give a quick background about CPC strategy and our positioning with Amazon. We are a retail-focused search management company. We focus on Amazon sales acceleration, paid search, and Google Shopping Management. We were founded in 2007. We now have over 350 active retail clients with over $75 million of ad spend under our management. So we know what it takes to drive success in online retail. And our core focus is sitting between the channels of Facebook, Google, and Amazon, understanding how all of them can work together to drive success for our clients and understanding the proper strategic plan to put in place to drive success in all of them individually as well as all of them collectively for your brand. So that's a quick overview of what we do here at CPC. without further ado, I'll turn it over to the WebGility team to give a quick intro on themselves.
Awesome, thanks. This is Rob again from WebGility. Just a quick overview. WebGility is the e-commerce central hub for small and medium-sized businesses with regard to financial data. One of our products, Unify, connects all of its different sales channels to the accounting system, and more importantly, we also integrate with industry leaders in shipping, inventory management, marketing automation, and point of sales. And the goal there is to help you optimize the operations for your whole business. We lead the industry here. We've saved thousands of customers' time, and our real focus again is e-commerce for the multi-channel seller, and we're compatible with over 80 e-commerce platforms, including, of course, Amazon, eBay, QuickBooks, and Xero as well. And so far, we've helped our customers process a little over 2.5 million orders on an average month, and saving them a little over $7 million in costs. So that's a little bit about WebGility. We're excited to be passing on some of this information as well. But next up, I do want to hand this over to Danny so he can talk a little bit about SKU Vault.
Hi, I'm Danny Shaw, again the Director of Business Development here at SKU Vault. SKU Vault's a warehouse management system built for e-commerce, with e-commerce in mind. SKU Vault started out with our founders being e-commerce merchants. The system was built to accommodate e-commerce and basically accommodate the growth of e-commerce and assist with single shipments and other needs related to e-commerce. SKU Vault's a full WMS system, warehouse management system. It accommodates everything from purchasing all the way through the warehouse management and fulfillment processes. SKU Vault also accommodates kits and bundles, FBA forecasting and replenishment reporting, and also accommodates user error prevention and warehouse management through user tracking.
Awesome, thanks Danny. So we're going to go ahead and get into some of the content, but first we really want to set the stage to understand, in the world of e-commerce, where are we today? And importantly, we are in a landscape of e-commerce that's been evolving over time, but at this point we're in sort of an in-between phase. It's the way that WebGility likes to look at it. There's a ton of operational tasks that are still manual. As I'm sure all of you know, you still got to put the actual item in the box, you've got to get it out, you've got to be able to track your inventory. Order management oftentimes has a lot of manual processes involved as customers call in to change or ask for refunds or discounts. The fulfillment process in general, whether that's a third-party fulfillment center or your own in-house warehouse, that is still a very, very manual process. Of course, the accounting, bookkeeping, analysis, a lot of these things still require human input, which of course means that there's room to make it smoother and faster and take away some of the more menial work. That's where a lot of the apps come in. There are niche applications that are designed to help with any given task in this process. In some cases it's just shipping. In some cases, like SKU Vault, it's a robust warehouse management and inventory management. For WebGility, we really focus on the financial data. But the problem is that today, too many of these apps that are industry leaders in the function that they provide, they're not integrated well enough into the others. And so the integration is painful. Oftentimes, merchants move to a more complete system that does many things, but oftentimes that leaves something on the table to be desired, such as either a lower cost, a lower price point, or oftentimes a cost-effective do-everything system doesn't really solve all the problems as perfectly as some of these niche applications do. More importantly, as you look at any of these stack of solutions being tied together, analysis becomes more and more difficult because the data that your business generates is scattered in different areas. So for example, you could have your shipping costs, your locations, where your customers are physically located, as well as how much it costs to get a particular item out to them in your shipping tool. But yet your inventory cost could be sitting in your inventory management solution. Your discounts and sales tax could be sitting someplace else. And pulling together multiple channels of sales data in itself is difficult, just to understand who your biggest customers are and who are the most valuable. So even today, despite the fact that there are so many top-of-the-line solutions for any particular problem, the analysis is getting harder and harder because that data is moving further away. And therefore, of course, as a team gets more efficient, focuses more on specific tasks, it's harder to get everyone aligned. It's very difficult to collaborate because there are so many different systems. It's hard to stay on the same page because you may be referencing something from the fulfillment side, whereas somebody in the marketing team is looking at a totally different system from a different perspective. So in today's world for e-commerce, it's a booming industry and the opportunity is still there, but we recognize, and I think everyone here does as well, that there's some operational difficulties sitting inside the business, and that's where we want to focus on a lot of today's presentation. So speaking of that, I do want to ask a quick poll to understand what fulfillment methods do you have that apply. So are you using something like an in-house fulfillment system? Are you packing your own boxes, taking it down to the store, to the post office? Are you using something like a seller fulfilled prime, where you have a very streamlined operation and you're able to get that buy box or that prime designation through your own warehouse? Are you leveraging Amazon? In this case, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar, and we'll be covering some FBA topics later, but fulfillment by Amazon is a big topic. There are other options such as dropship, where you may be having the actual manufacturer or the supplier directly ship to your customers. It's a great way to make sure you don't hold inventory on hand. Same thing with third-party logistics. You might have a separately owned warehouse or what we'd call a 3PL that can handle a lot of that for you. So it looks like the answers are in, and primarily we are running in-house with 55% and FBA 76%. The remaining have solid representation in the mid to low teens, so this is a pretty interesting group. Really excited. All right, so I'm going to hand everything over here to Danny. Danny again from SKU Vault. We're going to dig into some of the details of planning for the holidays.
Thank you. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about a few different ways to help ensure that your inventory is accurate going into the holiday season and that you're able to keep up with the boost in sales. One of the best ways to prepare for holiday seasons are stock takes, and through stock takes, physical counting. So a physical count, and what is physical counting here? It's an exhaustive annual audit, meaning that I take inventory of everything that's in my warehouse or warehouses. It involves physically counting all of your inventory, each item. So if I have full cases, most of the time, folks will crack open a full case just to make sure that all the items are in that case. It hasn't been resealed with a few items missing. And sometimes you'll want to schedule out this physical count. Most companies are going to want to do this during a downtime, maybe halt production for a day or fulfillment for a day. In some cases, you schedule a weekend for your warehouse staff to come in to count this inventory. And the purpose is, again, to understand exactly what you have in your inventory. The reason for doing this is there are several things that could have happened during your sales cycle to cause inventory discrepancies, such as damaged items were removed from the shelf without being documented, and then missed ships. So I've sent the wrong product out. So now in doing that, I have an oversell and an undersell scenario where I have more of what I thought I had for one item and less of what I thought I had for another. And then unfortunately another reason is product theft. So there are various reasons why you want to ensure that your inventory's count is accurate going into peak season. Now, aside from physical counts, there is a method called cycle counting. So instead of doing an exhaustive physical count of everything in my warehouse, counting every aisle, every shelf, every bin, every box, we could do cycle counting. Cycle counting means that I count a few locations within a certain time period each day. So instead of, again, counting my whole warehouse, locking down my operation and saying, hey, today we're going to count the whole warehouse, every box in the warehouse, with cycle counting, I can count a few bin locations, a few sections, or maybe even an aisle each day. And then that way, I'm gradually counting all my inventory. And instead of doing one physical count, I'm doing several smaller counts. And over time, I'm turning my warehouse. Now, with that being said, it's good to have a cycle counting method to where you start with maybe 4 or 5 counts over your whole warehouse a year. So meaning I've counted a few sections each day, and over time that means I've counted the warehouse 4 times over a year. And this is a flexible system, so you may start out at 4, and if you notice that your counts are pretty accurate and there's not too many discrepancies within those counts, maybe you want to scale those counts back and say, I only want to count my whole warehouse 2 times a year. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you notice there's a great deal of discrepancies between those counts and your inventory is inaccurate, then you'll want to scale up those counts. So maybe I'd want to count the warehouse 6 or 7 times a year instead of 4. But both of these methods are going to ensure that I have an accurate inventory count. And it's very important to have that accurate inventory count going into peak season because it's the biggest time for sales volume, and you could have discrepancies that lead to out of stocks, which can be very costly. It could cause bad feedback. It could cause loss of frequent customer support. It could cause bad feedback on your Amazon account, which can affect your search results. So there's many things to which having an accurate inventory count going into peak season will help. Another thing is, some folks may have misplaced a case of items in their warehouse and they're not aware that there is a whole case of goods in their warehouse. So, not only seeing what you don't have that you thought you did, but also seeing that, hey, there may be some products in your warehouse that I misplaced, I didn't document, and now I have extra goods to sell during the peak season. Now, with best practices in cycle counts, again, I suggested 4 times counting the warehouse so that you do 4 cycle counts a year. And that's a good starting point. Again, if you see that your cycle counts are pretty accurate and your inventory stays in check, then you may want to scale that back. Again, if if you're seeing that those cycle counts show quite a bit of discrepancy, then you're going to want to scale those up and count the warehouse 6, 7 times a year. Now, typically we suggest doing 4 cycle counts a year and 1 physical count, full physical count. Typically I suggest to do that full physical count in November or in October, late October. And the reason I say that is because you're doing that full physical count right before you get into peak season. Now, some folks do a full physical count in January, so I suggest if you're going to do a full physical count in January, do 2 physical counts a year. Do one in late October, early November, and then do that other physical count at the end of peak season. Now, the benefits of this model is you're going to spend fewer labor hours on counting. So even though you're still doing a full physical count, if you're doing those cycle counts in between your physical counts, you're reducing the discrepancies and reducing the amount of time spent on counting. Another benefit is fewer oversells and undersells, as we discussed earlier, and you're maintaining accurate inventory levels across your channels. Also, with doing cycle counts and physical counts, you understand exactly where your inventory is in your warehouse. Now, reordering and forecasting. So not only do we want to know how much inventory we have, but we want to also make sure that we are ordering regularly and also know how much inventory we need to order. So now that I know how much inventory I have by doing cycle counts and understanding that inventory, we can then use those metrics that we calculated from our sales history and also our current inventories to understand how many products we need to reorder. Now, there's several different reordering methods that I could go about using. One is using reorder points. So a reorder point is a quantity set based on a sales history within a certain sales cycle. Meaning, I know within 6 months I sell 40 of item X. So if my 6 months is my sales cycle, I'm going to use 40 as my reorder point, since I know that I have to have 40 of those items to carry me through my sales cycle. Another method for reordering is forecasting. So forecasting is a prediction based on analytics gathered through sales history, current inventories, what's open for purchase orders, understanding how much I should be able to use for the next sales cycle. And those metrics are calculated based on, again, sales history and applied the percentage growth over the next year. So a good way to look at that, if you're still using reports through Excel or analyzing your sales history through exports, is say, take my sales history from last November through January, last year's sales history. I want to take that. I want to take those 3 months worth of sales, and then I want to take my whole year's worth of sales divided by, so if we're at today, we're in September. So anything before September, so January to September of 2015, I want to see how much I had in sales for each item then, and then apply that to this year. So whatever the difference that may be, the difference between last January to September versus this January to September, whatever that percentage difference is, I apply that to my sales history last November through January. And that will give me an educated idea of how much stock I need to reorder to fulfill this peak season sales cycle. Now also with reordering, you'll want to develop normal reordering policies with your vendors. I know some folks out there are closeout buyers. I know some folks out there do retail arbitrage. I know we have some folks doing drop shipping, and we also probably have some folks on the line here listening doing just-in-time fulfillment. So if you're doing just-in-time fulfillment or you're doing drop shipping, then you can order from those vendors at the time of sale to collect that inventory to ship it out, or if you're drop shipping, have that sent to the customer. For those folks who are closeout buyers, make sure that you're analyzing your sales reports to see what products sold best the last peak season, and see if you can purchase the same products this year or similar products. With folks that do have a normal reordering strategy in place where they have a vendor with a regular reorder relationship, you'll want to use the reorder points or forecasting methods to set out how much stock you need to reorder. Now again, you'll use the forecasting methods, reorder points, and sales reporting tools to understand how much stock you need to reorder to fulfill your sales cycle in peak season. My suggestion is to have all purchase orders arrive at least 1 month prior to your peak season start. Now, another good way to prevent inventory errors during peak season are buffers. So we've covered ordering and making sure we have enough stock. We've covered counting and making sure that I know how much stock I have. But also, we need to set some safety stock aside, especially if I'm a multi-channel retailer or omni-channel. So if I'm selling, let's say, on Amazon, but I also sell on my own website. Well, there's a chance that during peak season, someone can purchase one product that I'm selling from Amazon and one from my website, and if I only have quantity 1 left and they purchase that at the same time, then that's going to create an oversell. So what buffers are basically setting a safety stock level. So if I have a buffer of 5, let's say I have 10 items. I sell through 5. When that quantity hits 5, if I have the buffer set up correctly, my buffer system will push 0 to the channels that I select. So for instance, I know that Amazon's my fastest selling channel. So therefore, I want to have my buffer set on Amazon. I know my website sells a little bit slower, and I'm also not going to get the repercussions of overselling on my own website as I would on Amazon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that buffer at 5 on Amazon, but I'm going to show all stock that I have available for sale on my website. Now, of course, if you have a manual system in place right now and you're adjusting your inventory manually, this is quite complex. So what I would suggest is say, hey, let's get 50, put 30 on Amazon, and then put 20 on your website, and let it sell down. Now, if you actually have an automated inventory system like SKU Vault, you can preset these buffers to where if you have 50 in stock, SKU Vault's going to push 50 to Amazon and your own website. Once you sell down to 5, SKU Vault's going to push 0 to your Amazon account and push 5 to your website. So that way, in case an oversell occurs and you have multiple folks purchasing the same product at the same time, you'll have that 5 safety stock, which will prevent that oversell from occurring. Quality control. So we talked about how to keep track of what I need to order, making sure I know what I have in my warehouse, and also making sure that I don't sell more than I have. Another thing that we have to be sure of, especially with peak season and how fast things are moving in the warehouse, is that the right items get sent out with each order, because this could cause its own problems. For instance, if I misship an item, so I send out a size 9 shoe for a size 10, that causes 2 inventory errors. It causes an undersell, because now I'm not going to be able to sell that size 10 I actually have in the warehouse. And now I'm going to have an undersell or a out of stock on the actual product I did send out. So we're making sure with quality control that I've sent the right products out. Now, I understand a lot of folks do not have an automated barcoding system or a way to prevent human error outside of manual checking. So if you are one of those folks that aren't using a barcoding system currently, my best advice here is to have a 2-step process. Have someone pack the order, and then have a more veteran employee check over the order and make sure that the order is packed correctly. Now, some of you may have an initial system in place or a stamp system to where a person initials or stamps on a packing slip that they actually fulfilled that order. And that's good to have in place, because then you can, when the order errors come in and the customers come in and notify you that there is an error on order, then you'll know who to retrain in your warehouse. Now, if you're using a system like SKU Vault, you can actually scan the items against the order as you're packing the box. One, that's going to make sure all the items are packed into the box. 2, it's going to make sure that it was packed accurately, and you're going to have history. So another reason that quality control is so important is that I may have a customer that falsifies a refund or exchange, meaning I have a customer that received their order correctly, but they call in claiming that the order had an error and they would like to receive a free item, so they're basically committing fraud to get a free item out of you. And I understand this happens, but to prevent that with quality control system in SKU Vault, you can go back and see the history of exactly what was scanned out against the order to make sure that your customers are not lying to you, but then also you're sending the right items out. So again, it's best in peak season, as a recap, to 1, frequently count your inventory throughout the year, and make sure you have a count before going into peak season. If you have the resources to be able to cycle count during peak season, that's a great thing to implement into your warehouse. 2, making sure you know what to reorder. So again, setting those reorder points, making sure you forecast out what you should reorder. Now is a perfect time to place those last minute orders for stock to get those items in before peak season. And then also set buffers. So apply the buffers to your channels. Make sure you're not going to be able to oversell those items on your website to get those errors. And last but not least, implement a quality control system to make sure that you're sending the right products out with the orders.
All right, thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
So obviously lots of content there. Hopefully everybody's been able to digest as we go along, because we're going to jump into a separate but related topic of FBA fees, and specifically the increase that's coming up this year. So for anybody who's a fan of CPC, they're going to be very aware of the fact that Amazon has published some increases that are going into effect in October. And what that really means, if you look through the vast majority of the changes to FBA fees, you're going to see that most of the year-long fees, most of the per package fees, most of those are actually going down, which is great. That's a huge help throughout the year, especially for people who rely on FBA primarily. Unfortunately, during the holiday season, there are some pretty significant increases specifically for the storage costs. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to why this is, but the general consensus is that there were a lot of retailers in the past who have overstocked Amazon just in case, right? Just putting in 5-10 times as many items as necessary to get through the holiday season, and just kind of using the FBA storage as a backup location. And what that did for Amazon is it kind of put some pressure on their overall capacity system capacity, and so now they're trying to match the fees to decrease that this year. And effectively what that means is during the holiday, November and December, the storage costs per square foot are going up by 2 times, 200% for oversized items, so your large items, and then over 300%, so a little over 3 times for the non-oversized items. Now the good news is, again, a lot of the other costs, including handling costs during the holidays, are actually going down, but those are on a per item basis, and that's sort of the once you've finished selling an item, when it's actually going out the door, those fees are going down. So what does that really mean, and what do you have to do? Pretty simply, because Amazon is going to charge a lot more to keep items on hand, you want to first and foremost make sure that you are qualifying for a featured merchant, meaning you're going to be able to fulfill prime orders yourself without having to have an item in FBA, which obviously means you have really high ratings, you have really high quality scores. And then you want to be competing for that merchant fulfilled buy box. So again, you're not dependent on Amazon having an item in the FBA inventory for you to get those the high volume of sales. That aside, assuming that you are going to put items into FBA, you want to try your best to get it as close to just in time as possible. And now I say that with some air quotes and an asterisk because we all know that Amazon has a wide range of times, and sometimes it's pretty slow, between you shipping an item to one of their distribution centers or one of the warehouses and when it finally shows up in your inventory. So to the extent that you can take last year's holiday season as a guidepost or the last several months, you should have an idea of how long it takes between your pallet of goods arriving at an Amazon distribution center or warehouse and how long it takes for them to process it, receive it, and show it as available. So as much as possible, try to replenish FBA stock just about the same time that you would get it, that you would see it coming down to those low levels. Again, probably lean on the side of caution just because it may have a huge spike, it may be a longer delay, but to the extent possible, err on the side of just in time. And then about the product mix, once you take a look at your products, try to lean more towards the high margin products. So if they do sit there for a little bit longer, you're not eating into your profit per item. This would mean that if you have something that is, say, 30, 40, 50% margin as compared to something that's 10, 12% margin at the price that you sell it on Amazon, you want to lean more towards a mix of those high profit items. Ideally, all of these should also have low competition, so the likelihood of you getting the buy box is really high, and just depends on what you're selling. Everybody has their own mix of different products, but the ones with a smaller physical footprint will of course be charged less when you're taking up space in the Amazon warehouse. So from there, we'll go on. We do have a poll pretty much related to this, and the question is really just where are you currently selling? We obviously assume, given the focus of this presentation, that most people are on Amazon. It would be interesting to understand where everyone is in terms of other marketplaces, their own website, physical locations, Main Street USA, or the wholesale. I'll give you guys just a second for that. All right. So as expected, pretty high range of folks who are on Amazon, a lot of folks who are also on their own website, which is great, and then some brick and mortar and some wholesale. No brick and mortar, excuse me, other marketplaces. So really good information, definitely fits in with the content that we're currently displaying. All right, now to change gears one more time, we're going to talk about how to look at your historical data and really understand what's going on with your finances. Coming back to the main point that we had earlier on, it's not your imagination that e-commerce is chaotic, right? As we mentioned, there are marketplaces for selling everything. The data standards are changing all the time, which affects, of course, your stack of systems that are designed to help you get through and run your business as efficiently as possible. New sales and fulfillment approaches such as FBA or Fulfilled by Merchant, they're always popping up different ways. You can use a 3PL or dropship, as we mentioned before. The plethora of apps, again, really impacts the way that you can aggregate your data and make sure that your systems are running smoothly together. And especially when you're looking at the analytics, trying to understand, as Danny mentioned, what are your big sellers during the holidays? What are the items that you think you need to have an extra buffer for because they're likely to have major spikes? Same thing, trying to understand the margins on a particular product after you take into account the marketplace fees and the FBA fees. That can be a really hairy task. So we're going to try to take a look here and understand the simple ways to get at some of the really key metrics. So first and foremost, what are the signs that you need some help? First and foremost, do you feel like you have a pulse on the financial health of your business? If anybody is anything other than shouting hooray, yes, I totally know everything about it, be warned, right? This can be a big issue as you get less and less familiar with the day-to-day financial health. Same thing with margins and understanding the levers, right? As something like an FBA fee increase hits you, are you able to tweak certain levers, right? Turn things around and really get it so that you're able to still maximize profit or revenue over a time period. And of course, I really hope people aren't sitting on a pile of spreadsheets, but let's be honest, that's where most analysis starts, right? Fire up Excel, drop in some data, and see what you can do. As you're looking a little bit deeper into your process, beyond maybe a simple margin or a simple high sales item, do you really understand where the bottlenecks are in your process? Is there a significant delay getting items from a third-party fulfillment center? Or are you having trouble with a particular supplier? Is there a marketplace where customers come once and they never come back? Or are you able to build a relationship and drive those customers for the repeat purchases? These are really good questions to ask yourselves, and keep these running in a dialogue in the background. So we all, I'm sure, have some adjustments that need to be made, but we need to ask ourselves first before we bang our heads against the wall and say, oh, sorry, I can't do that, too much work. Really understand what it is that's making it hard to make these changes. I think it's pretty clear we've been talking a lot about the systems that don't integrate with each other, the fact that your business is probably already running at full speed. So the idea of taking down a system, as Danny mentioned, for, like, say, a full stock count. I'm sure a lot of people are actually leaning more on a cycle count method, or in fact skipping it more often than they should, because the concept of shutting down the warehouse for an entire day just isn't palatable. Obviously, getting the getting the budget for marketing and infrastructure growth is really important, but we need to find out where we can squeeze those dollars and cents. And of course, at the end of the day, once you finish packing boxes or dealing with employee issues, it can be hard to try to say to yourself, I'm going to set aside time to really understand some of these larger, more difficult problems. So some of the solutions are obviously making the workflows more efficient, saves you some time as you're operating the business day to day, especially through peaks like the holidays, and then understand how to leverage some of these business systems like SKU Vault or Unify that can work together efficiently, automate a lot of these processes, again, take the time and the headache away, and give you some time to understand what's going on in your business. Not to mention, when the systems are working together smoothly, the data becomes more readily available. So obviously there's different strategies. We can talk about complementary sales channels, things like that, but I think the real key here is working with a smooth process and understanding where the data is and how to wring a little bit more value out of that. So now that we talked about what the problems are and how to go about making time, let's identify some of the key indicators of success for a business. I think if you haven't heard of average order value or AOV, this is definitely time to focus and hear what's going on here. Average order value, pretty simple concept overall, is understanding what is the average amount that a customer pays when they check out from you. And it's pretty simple math, right? Take a time period, take the total number of orders, take the total of all your revenue, divide it, you get an average. The impact of understanding your AOV, however, is big. So simple things like noticing that most customers pay, say, $15 on average for shipping if you charge for shipping, and the average order value is somewhere around $60. If you, say, run a promotion that says, I'll give you free shipping or $5 shipping for all orders over $75, you're going to drive more revenue, retain pretty solid margins, and likely increase the amount that customers are willing to buy from you, which may form a more advantageous habit. Things like understanding how to get to your revenue targets. This is the basic unit of the growth of your business. If the average order value is, say, $50 or $100, you then know how many orders you have to process, you know how many items have to go out the door to achieve your goals of revenue growth or sustainability for the year. That can really bring things down to the hard nuts and bolts to say, if I wanted $1 million or $10 million of sales this year, how many orders is that going to require? And now I have the chance to gut check, is my system, is my process capable of fulfilling that many orders? Is my reorder cycle short enough? Am I on top of my inventory effectively enough? Do I have enough staff? So this is sort of the building block for a lot of the rest of the analysis here. So I really recommend having an average order value calculation. If it's not done automatically in one of your systems, definitely have someone do this calculation once a month. That way you can track to see if any of your promotions are changing it or if you're having any impact on the business. The next step, of course, is to figure out how much of that average order value you're retaining in profit. There's a lot of factors here, so we'll talk about a few of the major issues, but primarily you need to understand what the cost of each of your items are. I think that's something that retailers are really, really good at, is tracking how much you bought a widget for versus how much you sold it. What a lot of people are missing, though, is the little nuances, the things that are harder to see every day, things like the shipping cost. That's probably in the middle. Most people pay a little bit of attention to that, maybe on the aggregate. But things like payment processing fees, that 1 to 3% that Stripe or PayPal or your payment processing is taking from you, not to mention the fees from Amazon. Even if you're not using FBA, you're still being charged some commission on each of those sales. Different marketplaces have different fee structures. So it can be really, really hard to really track down what the average profit is. So in some cases, I recommend getting a separate tool or seeing if any of the systems that you use right now are capable of showing you this data. But if not, again, sit down every once in a while, take even an aggregate of the last month or two of data and really try to track to see what, on average, are you making off of each order. Because at the end of the day, after sales tax, after the cost to fulfill, after all your marketplace fees and payment processing fees, you need to have something that you can put in the bank and show is yours. Otherwise, we all know that's not a recipe for a successful business. A subunit of that average order profit is obviously the gross profit for each item. Now, the reason that we put this one in there as well is because you may see average order profit changing over time, and one of the main drivers of that may be that the mix of items your customers are buying or the products that you're promoting have a different gross profit margin. Now, gross profit margin, again, pretty simple. I think most retailers get this, is how much you sold a widget for versus how much you bought it for. Now, if you look at something like the 80-20 rule, oftentimes 80% of your profit is going to come from 20% of your products or your sales. So comparing, let's say, a ranked list of your most profitable items by gross profit versus your top selling products, which is here, that can give you an indication of where you're at. Are you primarily selling items that have very, very low margin, or are you able to sell a solid mix between the two and therefore have sort of a portfolio of different profit items that you can sustain your business with? So once you look at this, once you understand the top selling items, maybe even segment them by different time periods. So again, as Danny mentioned, during the holiday season, there may be a totally different top selling item than during the year. If you have seasonal items like certain clothing, or if you have school-related things, anything that might have a season, try to understand what that ebb and flow is so you can compare year over year your top-selling products in each segment of the year. But you also want to make sure once you pull all this data in, you understand some really nuts and bolts types of data, things like inventory days to zero. As Danny mentioned, you want to make sure you have a buffer so that when you replenish, you're not overselling, you're not underselling, you're able to keep enough items in stock to both retain your cash flow, but also make sure that you're maintaining those high sales and fulfilling orders when customers want them. This can be a very simple metric for each of your products just to understand how close you are. And the basic calculation here is over the last 30, 60, 90 days, how many items on average have you sold per day? So item A, I sold 1 per day. If I have 50 left in stock, I have 50 days until I think I'm going to be out. You obviously want to not cut it right to the line there, but having an understanding of where you're at with each of your products can help you plan that reorder point much further in advance and avoid that overselling. So that's really all we have. I think it's time now for Q&A. Again, here's your presenters. Feel free to ask any one of us a question. I know we're all pretty happy to spend the rest of the time getting into specifics.
Awesome. Rob and Danny, thank you very much for all of that great information. Very helpful. And we've gotten some good questions coming in from the audience, so thank you to everyone who's been one of the first questions we got was more related to counterfeit products and might touch on tangentially some of the topics that both of you guys had been discussing. Excuse me. We got a question coming in from Sydney around how to prevent counterfeiters from listing against their products, and if there's any recommendations from anyone on the panel around using labeled or stickered inventory versus stickerless commingled inventory. Rob or Danny, do you guys have any recommendations there, and maybe can go into a little bit more detail on maybe even what that means or what that is?
Yeah, so if Danny doesn't have anything, obviously you're the inventory expert, Danny, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I was going to let you go ahead, Rob, but thank you. So basically, it's kind of a tricky scenario with commingled inventory. That is opening you up to have some errors, right? So if you're commingling your inventory, there's a chance that another party that is commingling their inventory with the same item may have mislabeled that item, could have sent a damaged item in, and that could be mixed in with your commingled inventory. So it's always safest to have your inventory independent, but if commingling is necessary, you could label the item with a unique color barcode label. You're obviously going to have to follow the formatting guidelines that Amazon presents, but that's always a distinction to have maybe a separate color little dot on the barcode, so that way if you do get a return in, it's not your item. But as far as my suggestions go, I would keep my inventory independent as much as I could.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I'll add in that one of the key things to look at is the risk to both your profile and your seller rating. So if you're going to have, say, a significant savings or an improvement in your likelihood of hitting the buy box because you're in the commingled inventory, take that with a grain of salt by comparison to what it may mean to your seller profile if something that is counterfeit or lacking the quality that you typically provide comes out and gets attributed to you. So definitely look at some of those outside strategies like color coding the barcode, changing the product, the packaging or some other process there, and weigh that against the risk to your business of having something counterfeit.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Excellent. Thank you, guys. So some other questions coming in here. We have one from Thomas that seemed to be related to the slides where we were discussing how to track online inventory versus brick and mortar inventory separately. And I know there was some discussion around some safeguards that we could put in place to help avoid double selling items both online and at the store. And Rob, I believe you were kind of, or Danny actually, I think you were presenting some scenarios there and some safeguards. Do you want to just kind of revisit what you were discussing there, how to prevent double selling that inventory online versus in the retail store?
Yes, so it's very key to have a point of sale system that integrates with your online inventory system. So if you do have a brick and mortar presence as well as e-commerce, I have one or two suggestions. Either you completely separate that inventory during peak season to where you only have brick and mortar and only have e-commerce. So basically either draw a line down the middle of your warehouse or know that, hey, this stock exists in my store only and then this is e-commerce. If you have an integrated POS system, a point of sale system that works with your inventory system, which is obviously the best way to go about it, then they could have that brick and mortar inventory pushed to your inventory system, which would update your channels. So if you do have a brick and mortar sale, that would update your online inventory and vice versa. And then also you could put those buffers into place that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you don't have an integrated solution and maybe you're managing your quantities manually on your channels, you want to set a certain amount of stock aside for each channel. So if you have 30 total and you sell on Amazon and your own website and brick and mortar, you may want to say 10, 10, and 10. But with a real-time inventory system that integrates with your POS, with something like SKU Vault where you could set those buffers, you would set that amount of safety stock for your brick and mortar sales depending on how many sales you had in your sales history for that time period. So there's different ways to set those buffers, but again, the more automated the better. If you don't have an automated system to track it, then I would suggest to be safe and set aside a certain amount of inventory for each channel.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I'll add in one horror story. Do you remember any items that you have out for display or inside of a showroom where a customer can touch and feel? We had one customer who forgot to count that as sort of a buffer item and ends up selling something online that a customer was holding in their store. So definitely focus on those buffers and remember where different inventory is available.
That's a good point to keep in mind. Take account of that inventory that is actually on display there and don't count that as something you can sell online. It's a good tip. Excellent. So we had some additional questions coming in just around cycle counts versus the physical counts and maybe some of the distinctions there. We had one question come in. It seems a little bit more of a hopeful question, but will there ever be cycle counts without discrepancies? Is that even a possibility, or should you plan on those counts, whether they're the full counts or the cycle counts, having some sort of a discrepancy that you just need to deal with?
Yeah, I'd say that having no discrepancies ever in a cycle count is a very lofty goal to achieve. I'm sure that there has been a case where a cycle count showed 100% accuracy on inventory, and that's great. But for the most part, it's not necessarily, your cycle count's not saying, hey, it's a bad thing if you have a discrepancy, because you want to know if you have that discrepancy. It's not a great thing to have discrepancies in inventory, but the goal of the cycle count is to understand where those discrepancies arise. Now, whether or not they're a large discrepancy, that's rarely where you're going to take a cycle count even further. So the cycle count is to evaluate how much of a discrepancy you have in your inventory. From there, you can evaluate why you have those discrepancies. So, it depends on what kind of systems you're currently using, but within SKU Vault, you could do a cycle count. We'll show you the discrepancies, and then we'll also show you the transaction history and location history, so you can then determine, who's added those products into stock, who's picked them, what orders those products went out for, did I remove any from damage, and did I not scan it out? So, that's where cycle counts really come in handy, is to find out why your inventory discrepancies are occurring. First, understand what those are, and then find out why they're happening.
Sure, that makes sense. We did have one question come in. It sounds like this one might be good for both you guys. From Clayton, just asking about some of the longer receiving times on Amazon's end. It sounds like the seller's probably sending inventory into FBA, where that receiving time would matter. Have you guys seen that increase? And actually the follow-up question here from him is there a standard rule of thumb as to how much inventory you would typically keep on hand in Amazon, or how much inventory you would recommend a client keep on hand on Amazon, 1 month's worth, 2 months worth, 3 months, anything like that, or are there variables that would impact that recommendation?
I'll say from my perspective that at the very least track how long it's taking Amazon to replenish once you've sent something out, and at minimum take your average sales or your days to zero and have at least that many days in stock, ideally double that, so that you're not basically sending out a new replenishment the minute that another one shows up in your stock.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, Rob. And then also, if you're worried about the receiving time, I would definitely look into the seller fulfilled or Prime fulfilled by seller program as well, and that eliminates that time for receiving. But yeah, again, if you understand how much product you're sending out based on your sales cycle, that'll allow you to more effectively send stock to FBA. Understand not only how fast you're selling, but as Rob mentioned, how fast it's taking them, or how long it's taking them to process that inventory as well.
Excellent advice. Thank you, guys. Actually, you did mention Seller Fulfilled Prime. We did have another question more related to that. Just around the logistics there. Do all of those shipments need to go out in that 2-day window? Do you guys know if they need to conform to the same types of fulfillment standards that Amazon would have of their own Prime program, meaning 2-day shipping and you ship every single day of the week? What's your feedback there?
Yes, I would say you need to send those out as soon as possible, depending on your automation tools. And I really encourage this program for sellers. Actually, two of the first companies to do the Seller Fulfilled Prime program were SKU Vault customers, and they've had a great deal of success with it. The thing that you have to understand is now you're managing the fulfillment. So if you're currently just FBA and that's the only fulfillment model you have in place, I would urge you to be prepared to understand and have a set fulfillment process and system in place before you get into that program. So maybe try fulfilling some orders through your website first to get used to the fulfillment process, and then add the Prime Fulfilled by Seller program, because again, if you're going to take on that influx of orders, fulfilling that from an in-house model, if you have prepared and set up a fulfillment model in-house, that's going to be quite a cumbersome task. Whereas if you were already fulfilling orders out of your own warehouse, you're not at pain points. So I would urge, if you're going to get into that program, to at least understand how to set up a fulfillment model internally before actually getting enrolled in the program.
Interesting.
And it makes sense to take a look at it from Amazon's perspective, right? If they're telling the customer who's checking out that they're getting a Prime purchase, I would expect that you're going to be held to at least that many, or at least those standards. So just understanding it from another retailer's perspective probably helps to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that the Prime Seller Fulfilled Prime program is regional. So if you're, say, in California, unless you're the brand and only seller of those products. If someone in New York orders that item, chances are that's going to be fulfilled from a center closer to New York rather than your warehouse.
Oh. Had another question here, Rob. You were touching on some of the FBA fee increases coming up for Q4, and it looked like those fee increases were specific to November, December. Do those come back down again in January, or are those planned fee increases going to be permanent?
So from what Amazon has put out there so far, those do come back down in January. The major issue seems to be November and December. The rest of the year, most fees are actually lower than they used to be.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, it does seem to be a temporary increase there, which is good. But like you touched on, Amazon is trying to focus on moving through that inventory more quickly, and it sounds like preventing them from or preventing sellers from just sending in a bunch of inventory just to use Amazon as a backup, which makes a lot of sense. So given the options between seller fulfilled Prime versus FBA, Danny, that you were just touching on, given that the fees are going to be increasing soon, would you recommend that it still makes sense for retailers to test out FBA and see if they can get into that program, or do you think it would make more sense to try and test out seller fulfilled Prime and ramping up there? Or what are some of the things you might take into account there?
It depends on your product category and product type, and also where you're wanting to sell those products. So I really preach that, hey, if you can fill those orders in-house, do it, because one, you're not going to have to wait for the processing time of FBA, but at the same time, if you're selling through Amazon UK or Amazon France or Amazon Japan, send those products to FBA, let them fulfill the orders internationally, and then pick up the domestic orders yourselves. So I think that's a good balance to have. And then maybe there also is a volume metric to include there too. So maybe your top sellers that you want to fulfill, you keep those in-house, and then maybe your slower sellers you send to FBA. So that way you don't have to worry about fulfilling those orders and housing that inventory.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And actually a related question, it looks like from the same person here, asking about how FBA or seller fulfilled Prime might actually impact organic rankings. And we do see that fulfillment method can actually impact that, and not necessarily the fulfillment method between FBA or seller fulfilled Prime, because the customer is still going to see that Prime badge. But if you're trying to decide between a product that's going into the Prime program versus a product that you're fulfilling, sometimes a Prime product can have an impact on organic rankings, and so potentially something that you want to take into account there. But obviously you don't want to go into that program if it's going to negatively impact your profit margin. Otherwise you're just accelerating how quickly you're losing money. So obviously something you need to take into account there. So another couple questions that were coming in here. Some questions around bin locations and naming bin locations in your warehouse to expedite those cycle counts or those physical counts. Are there any recommendations on how to go about doing that, or a method for naming them efficiently so that you can get through those counts as quickly as possible? Do you guys have any input there?
Rob, do you have anything there?
To be honest, I don't. I think there's probably a good fit for every different company.
Yeah, and it's always good to have a convention to where you have your warehouse laid out in an order that makes sense as the path traveled around the warehouse. So for instance, the first aisle you come to, call that aisle 1 or aisle A, and then split the vertical sections or columns, and then shelf height. So for instance, if I'm in a warehouse and I'm looking at the first aisle, the first section and the first shelf on the floor, that would be 01 AA01, for instance. And that way it gives you a generic bin location name that makes sense around the path of the warehouse, and it makes counting a lot easier rather than just saying, hey, I know within this 10-foot rack I have 300 of these items. You're narrowing it down, making those locations smaller so they're easier to count and easier to understand exactly where the product is.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, guys. Well, we are about 5 minutes over now, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We've gotten a lot of great questions coming in, so thank you to everyone who's been submitting those. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question here on the webinar, keep in mind we will be following up with a blog post and an email with both the recording of the webinar as well as a post addressing any questions that we didn't get a chance to get to. So thank you very much for everyone that attended and participated. Much appreciated. Also, thank you very much to Rob and Danny for providing all of their insight here on today's webinar. A lot of great information here, so thank you guys very much. And best of luck to everyone that attended in helping to plan for their inventory needs for this upcoming Q4. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.